And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, where these and all other shows, even a connection to our digital analog days, if you will, at WPRO, AM 630, AM 790, live in perpetuity. And of course, that's coalitionradio.us. We got a very special evening tonight. Joining me in just a few moments is Mr. Allan Giberti. He is, of course, a spokesman for a number of communities discussing your fundamental right to self-defense. Later on in the show, we're kicking off a segment that we call Libertarian Fabulous. At 8 o'clock every week, we're going to have a national libertarian guest on, someone who's running for high office in a variety of states around the country. We'll attempt to share and display the commonalities of issues facing northeastern corridor states, states in the Midwest, and why government is not necessarily the best solution for every occasion. The politics, of course, this week, a very quick week in review here in Rhode Island. Clearly, the gubernatorial elections are heating up, as is the mindless rhetoric from a number of the people running. What we're looking forward to, hopefully, is a clear elucidation of the issues challenging everyday Rhode Islanders. Instead, what we're treating to is mindless rhetoric and seemingly an unending stream of corporate welfare being promised by the regime in change. As we progress through the summer and into the election season, we will continue to have candidates on who are running for local office as well. We'll continue to ask them to address directly the challenging facing everyday Rhode Islanders, as opposed to the hallucinations, if you will, of the current regime. Look forward to more and more of that. I would also be remiss if I didn't take a mention and memorialize the passing of one Wildside client. If you're a fan of 990WBOB.com, which is a great local resource, a wonderful indie media source, and really one of the grandfathers, if you will. I hate to say that because their technology is pretty good. But the original lineup of the Coalition goes back into 2013. David Clyde, Wildside Clyde, as he's known to his audience, was a prolific presence, a humorous presence on the local indie media scene. He will be sorely missed. His humor, his intelligence, his insight, his wit, his frenetic activity, and his willingness as a true, and I say this with the greatest of love, he was truly Rhode Island's official radio mensch. He was every man. His life tragically cut short by illness. So to my friends at 990 WBOB, I say God bless. To his family, I say he was a man well valued in this community in Rhode Island. He had a lot to say, and he never hesitated saying it. And to my friends in circle who were close from him, people like Tony Jones, Scott Rotondo, et al., I say God bless, and my hearts are with you. One of the most compelling issues this year in the legislative session, obviously, was the emergence, post-tragedies, of rather difficult, rather invasive, rather constitutionally challenged, yet feel-good gun legislation here in the state of Rhode Island. Here in the Coalition, I routinely host both sides of just about every issue, again, facing everyday Rhode Islanders. It could be government intrusion, it could be Fourth Amendment rights, it could be the war on drugs, it could be corporate cronyism, it could be the tax system, it could be the failures of UHIP, it can be any one of a number of issues. But I've never made any secret of the fact that I'm a libertarian, and I support the fundamental right of one to defend oneself in any situation. It's a human right. It's a natural right. And in having people like the ACLU on and the gun rights community, as well as folks supporting this legislation, what I've tried to point out routinely is that interference in functional human rights, in the natural rights of quote-unquote man and woman, never go well. The unintended consequences are often severe. And in the case of so many issues surrounding gun legislation, whether it be the bump stock laws, whether it be the red flag laws, I personally have taken time, as the chairman of the Libertarian Party, to testify vociferously up at the State House. I don't doubt that at some level it's cost me friendships or it cost me relationships with people in the progressive community. I value their opinions. I simply disagree with several of them. So I wish it wasn't so. But this show will never back down, nor will I, from ascribing to the virtues and the necessity of honoring fundamental human, fundamental natural-born rights. And clearly, the defense of oneself is the most basic. So basic, in fact, that it actually will act as a, if you will, an intervening argument should you take someone else's life. Our court system recognized self-defense as an appropriate response to the violation of one's physical rights and be someone who is, if you will, the recipient of outright violence. So with that spirit in mind, I finally had the opportunity, he's a very busy man, to bring on someone whose show who became, I would say, an unexpected star because he's quietly worked in the background for a number of years on political issues in and around Rhode Island. But in one of the more compelling testimonies, and we had a link to it in our show promotion, and it will continue to be up at coalitionradio.us and facebook.com/coalitionradio, Allan Giberti's testimony to Mr. Jason Knight, who is currently the representative from Barrington and Warren, was perhaps the most compelling video to come out of a number of great presentations. As I reflect back on that evening, and as I did at the time, what I found amazing was the sophistication, the level of education, and the presentation skills of so many average, regular Rhode Islanders who felt that given the current, if you will, the current sensibilities up at the State House, as well as the era of tragedy that surrounded several terrible school shootings in the United States, that these laws still, as well-intentioned as they may or may not have been, represented a direct violation, again, of our civil and natural rights. So his testimony was amongst the most compelling because it addressed several key issues in the LGBTQ community. So in that, I couldn't wait to have him on the air to discuss the issues more in depth. Allan Giberti, welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you for having me.
Well, so let's give folks a little flavor, if you will, of yourself, a little background. Tell us about, you are a lifelong Rhode Islander?
Yes, I'm a lifelong, Rhode Island native. I lived here most of my life, moved away for a little while, came back, like most of us do.
You try to get out, and they pulled you back
yes.
in. Excellent. Tell us a little bit your background in terms of growing up. Were you involved in rifle and gun shooting, and as a hobbyist, as a hunter, as a young person?
No, not so much. I was around guns. My father was in the military. Actually, my father came here from the Philippines. He got a citizenship. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy, served for 20 years, became a U.S. citizen. So guns around the house wasn't anything new. We would just taught, this is a gun, this is how you respect it, mm-hmm. and it went from there. So it wasn't anything that was horrible or scary.
Right. And let me jump in for a second. How important, and we're going to get to touch on this a little later, but that sense of familiarity and that sense of respect, how important is that to someone both growing up around guns or a young person who might not be in the presence of guns all the time?
I think it's very important. It's just like any other tool. You can take a chainsaw, just like recently, and you can use it for good. Let's clear a path, let's build a log cabin, or you can attack someone. It's a tool. So I think once somebody learns about it, learns how to use it, safety procedures, it's just like anything else.
Mm-hmm. So is it fair to say that someone's going to be, if they are familiar with it, both the intricacies and the potential dangers if used improperly? That's a great analogy, a chainsaw. How important that it is for a small child, to understand the power of a weapon?
Very important. I mean, I remember, I'm dating myself, back in school when the police would come in and we would have a little gun safety about, after Christmas when everyone got their BB guns and things like that. So I think the familiarity, the respect, knowing what it is capable of, I think is basically, it's a lesson. You're learning what to do and what not to do. Just a chainsaw, just like a car. Mm-hmm. This is how you use it, and as long as you treat it with respect and you know what you're supposed to do, we should, mm-hmm. we'll be okay. Now,
on a personal level, as someone growing up around guns, at what point in time did you begin to actively shoot, to actually get comfortable and use them both at target ranges or in hunting?
It was probably 12. And it was always with my father. It was my father or any of his Navy buddies when we went out shooting. So we were experienced, and it wasn't something that we did avidly. It was something usually that followed right around the opening of fishing season. His friends, they'd get their license, and then afterwards, they'd get together after a few days later, make plans, and we would go shooting.
All right, so, and what type of weapons were you using at the time?
Pretty much rifles.
So long rifles?
Yes. Long rifles, not so much handguns. My father pretty much just had me handle rifles.
And, through high school at that point in time, was this ever seen as something abnormal, or was this just part of growing up as someone who was a sportsman?
It was part of growing up. My cousin used to go hunting with his father all the time. So, guns wasn't, if somebody had a gun, a family had a gun, it wasn't a big surprise or a big shock. It wasn't a big to-do.
So, just an accepted part of life?
Yes.
All right. From your earliest consciousness, when did you begin to sense that this was all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm using a gun? Is ever, until recent events, ever part of the conversation? Were people surprised that you were?
When we started demonizing guns or blaming guns as opposed to blaming the individual, and being gay, when I found out that I was, pro-gun or pro-Second Amendment, or pro-defense, pro-civil liberties, that's when I started to notice that when people started repeating back to me the rhetoric that they heard, that guns kill, that bad people get a hold of guns, and that's when I started to notice this is for my protection. This isn't what you're saying. You're wrong. That's when I started to notice, and basically when Rhode Island started going all full-on gun grab is when I said I can't do this.
Now, politically, you're active. You're president of the Log Cabin Republicans here in Rhode Island.
Yes, I am.
And so clearly they are in support of Second Amendment rights.
Yes.
But you've taken it a step further. Now, there are national organizations that focus on the LGBTQ community that do that. I think Pink Pistols is one of them.
Yes, Pink Pistols is one.
Is there a separate organization here in Rhode Island yet?
There is not. There will be soon. After what I'm planning on doing, once the event on the 4th,
right.
I am going to, basically there will be a sign-up sheet. So if anyone who is there wants to continue on a regular basis, whether it's bi-monthly, every month, meet up at a local range and practice shooting.
And we'll take an opportunity a couple times during the show to promote this, but August 4th, you've got an event coming up,
yes,
which is going to be at a local gun range.
Yes, Smithfield
You're,
Sportsmen.
in a sense, a coming out shooting event. Tell us a little bit about that. And we'll
basically, what it is an instructional event geared towards the LGBT community and their allies, and the importance of the Second Amendment, of taking our own defense seriously. To get people familiar with it, to understand that hate crimes for the second year in a row have risen. They are real. The LGBT community is frequently attacked. To try and remove guns from a segment of our community, to leave us defenseless, is basically something that it's like throwing us to the wolves. It's like they've gotten our vote, they don't care.
And that's an important point, too, because clearly identity groups like the LGBT community and others are routinely sort of thrown sops by some of the major political parties, particularly the Democratic Party,
yes,
who seems to feel some sense of ownership over your vote.
Yes, they do. They do own it, and they have owned the community's vote for quite some time.
Right. Despite the fact that as a political organization, they weren't exactly in the forefront of marriage equality or any of the other basic civil rights.
No, they weren't.
That
if you ask anyone, the community votes Democrat because the Democrats are the ones that save the LGBT community. Not really, and they're not doing anything to save us now.
And I want to touch on that, but a fundamental. And by the way, so the event is August 4th.
August 4th at the Smithfield Sportsmen Club.
Right, and there's a Facebook sign up. as well.
Yes.
All right, and again, that's part of the promotion that we did as part of the show promotion. We'll continue to share that regularly from the Coalition Facebook page up and through the 4th, as well as other events that any new groups that coalesce out of this opportunity present themselves. Because, for the record, the Coalition supports LGBTQ rights, the rights to marriage equality, and the same rights that every American citizen should have, as obviously, it should go without saying, the right to self-defense. And for constitutionalists among us, we'll talk about the Second Amendment. But let's take it one step further. I talk about it being a natural right.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the right to self-defense?
Oh, I mean, obviously it is a fundamental right. As far as the gun grab goes, the self-defense, the Second Amendment, it's equality. I should have the same right or the same opportunity to defend myself equally, regardless of who it is that I'm defending myself from.
Right. Whether it be a violent attacker or an out-of-control government who would seek to use force and use coercion to subvert you or your community. Are there any qualifications to that? Folks routinely point out towards technological differences between, quote unquote, the musket days when, which was, at least physically the generation of the Second Amendment to today. Is there any real qualifier there?
You mean like basically the argument is saying that our forefathers meant muskets and not?
Right.
Well, we've known that automatic machine guns, even way back then, were in use. This isn't anything new. The military assault style weapons have been around decades. Mm-hmm. Suddenly they're an issue. It's not the guns that are an issue. It's the people that are the problem. It's families are the problem. It's upbringing that's the problem. Mm-hmm. It's coddling that's the problem. No one is responsible for their own actions. Most people are victims.
So at what point in time is there any level in which, in your thoughts, your opinions, that restricting rights to arms is at all productive?
I mean, aside from not letting a bad person get a hold of a gun?
Yeah.
No.
Let's talk about, in a city like Providence where where sadly incidents of violence, despite rhetoric to the contrary, still occur in people in the LGBT community. Is there any special qualifier that folks who are gay shouldn't be able to defend themselves?
I think if you ask some of our Democratic legislators, they will just say, yes, there is. Mm-hmm. Well, they will say, no, there isn't, but what it is yes, there is, because whether they take the guns away from you or your children there, or me or our children, it's basically the qualifier is we don't care about you. Mm-hmm. The Democratic Party, the legislation that they put out, and I've outlined it as to how would we defend ourselves.
Right.
I've gotten no answer.
It's been a few months too, hasn't it?
Yes.
And yet the onslaught, the push. Now, my comment, not my guess, let's be honest, that Representative Knight's campaign, as well as several others, were funded somewhat exhaustively by groups who were single interest, who were simply interested in legislating against access to weaponry and fundamentally against the right to self-defense. So it's no shock or surprise that Representative Knight would aggressively pursue that agenda. And it largely has been an agenda too, hasn't it? I mean,
yes, it has.
This is no happenstance. And again, my opinion, I love your reaction to this. I mean, I personally believe that legislation should never be the result of public tragedy. That sober minds must sit back, take a moment or two or three, and analyze the potential effects of legislation in reaction to tragedy. Is that what effectively happened here, or do you think there's a longer-term agenda?
No, I think it's pretty much, it's all knee-jerk. I think it's all pandering for votes. I think it's giving the public, the screaming public, what they want so that they can get in for another term. Mm-hmm. Whether it's guns or whether it's illegal immigrants, it's who they're pandering.
Is there any percentage, or has anyone done any study of the LGBT community and how many of them arm themselves?
I would say like unofficially, because there is no registry. You need to. One of the gun ranges that I belong to, they have a large membership, and a good percentage of their members are members of the LGBT community. So we're the community in general is quite well armed. I believe we're second as far as groups go, as far as owning firearms.
Interesting. And your your presentation became, like I said, became viral around the state. Probably because, sadly enough, in most of the public testimony, no one had ever really couched the argument in those terms, how they would directly impact your community, which is a statement unto itself. I mean, part of the fun of doing this show is having a conversation with folks before and after, and sometimes if we had commercial breaks, during the commercial breaks. But is there any effective liaison within the LGBT community?
There was years ago, decades ago. There's nothing. As far as I know, there's not. Let's say nothing that is not partisan, that is not pandering to something, that can look at something and say, well, this would be good because of this, or this would be. I mean, if I had an issue or why it wasn't good for the LGBT, I would be the first one to say something. But it's not, and nobody can tell me why this is a good thing for us. We should have, I think, citizens who have legitimate concerns be able to raise these concerns and someone address them, as opposed to someone saying, we'll get back to you. I don't know which community, committee would look into this. I don't know what committee would. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. That would require, I think, an effort on our state government's part, and I think it would require an actual interest into what happens. So, I mean, not just me or the LGBT community, but any other minority group that's, functioning in society.
Right. I mean, and on one level, I will say, this government does a very poor job of reaching out to what I'll call stakeholders in legislation. Because I don't believe when you've got an issue, for example, in your community, relative to potential legislation, I don't believe that's NIMBYism. I don't believe that's identity politics. I believe that's simply a reaction to a law being passed which will adversely impact the quality, or in some cases, literally, the continued existence of members of your community. So I don't see that as identity politics. I see that as just, I don't know, being good government.
Yes, I agree. I think, I mean, as far as LGBT groups, we have our, the federal government, we have the LGBT Equality Caucus, which David Cicilline is one of the, is a chairman. Langevin is also a member. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I've made requests to speak with Langevin. Waiting for that. Cicilline, I think I have a better chance of buying another lottery ticket. I probably would get something from there first. As far as him being an openly gay man and caring about the LGBT, no. I mean, he was advocating for the gay or trans defense panic, which Rhode Island just passed, but I believe he was doing that federally. But other than that, the LGBT caucus, I've contacted them, I've reached out to them. They put up press releases and they do a lot of tweeting. That's about it. Nothing.
So they might celebrate an event relative to gay history or something, but
yes.
They're not really materially addressing any of the issues revolving around, again, fundamental civil rights issues.
Correct.
I grew up in the New York metropolitan area during the 60s and the 70s. And as a very young person, I can remember the events and certainly the drama and the noise around two, I guess, historic eras in the LGBT community. And of course, I'm talking about Stonewall. I was a small child then, but I spent a lot of time in Manhattan. And then I was a young adult during literally the onslaught and then the height of the HIV crisis.
Yes.
It strikes me, and you know, being older, I learned a lot from the folks watching, in some cases very close quarters, the folks in ACT UP, who really redefined American politics and redefined the notion of political theater, and essentially managed to change the entire course of an American health system in the space of less than 5 years.
Yes.
We went from HIV being in complete denial of what was clearly a burgeoning and became very quickly an epidemic, to making it the epicenter of American medical research in just a few years. And by bringing the full might of American research onto that, at least have stemmed somewhat through cocktail drugs and other things, managed to stem and start to now defeat what was really a pandemic in the making. So we're years past that. How is it then that, and I don't look to government to cure anything, but I also don't want them to get in the way. How is it that in the year 2018 we're still having fundamental discussions about human rights?
In this state, well, I guess it's probably with a lot of the states, whether it's California, Massachusetts, here, it's about an agenda. It's about dependence. It's about making us victims. We've been told we've been victims since day one. Mm-hmm. We're not, and they would love it if we are, if we were dependent on them, if we were dependent on them for our safety, if we were dependent on them for legislation such as hate crimes or anti-discrimination laws, which, I'm sorry, or a joke, they don't want us to have civil liberties. They want us to be dependent on them, so we keep them in office. Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly what it is, pure and simple.
That's a pretty tough call.
I think it's the truth.
So within the federal government, you're not looking for special treatment. You're just looking for an acknowledgement.
Looking for equal treatment.
Right.
If I'm 2 to 3 times more likely to be the victim of a hate crime because of my sexual orientation, or more than that because I'm Asian and gay, which makes it all the more of a risk, I should have the same rights as you or anyone else to be able to defend myself.
Yet here's the irony. Rhode Island, with some justification, is often portrayed as a very welcoming state, and Providence in particular is a city that, at least on economic terms, has had open arms to a number of communities, whether they be refugees from other parts of the world, whether it be the LGBT community. And clearly we, as a city, as a culture, both spiritually, economically, we're a much better place for them. I was privileged again this year to march for the 3rd time with the Libertarian Party, 3rd year in a row, with the in Pride, mm-hmm. And it was an outburst, an explosion of culture, of love, of genuine affection for a city and a state that, in so many ways, has been so, at least by national standards, perceived as welcoming. So what do we do then? And I want you to think about this, because I'm going to take a quick station break, if you will. But what do we do then as a community? And this is where the challenge becomes in. And when I say community, I'm not just limiting it to the LGBT community, but its allies, who should be really everyone. Mm-hmm. Because, well, again, we're talking about fundamental human rights here. What do we do as a culture and a political community, I'll broaden it, to address what is clearly this imbalance? I want you to think about that for a second. Folks, if you're just joining us, Allan Giberti, he has a number of roles in civic life here in Rhode Island. He became, I'll call it famous, if you will, for a highly principled yet provocative set of statements and demands relative to the role of the Second Amendment in the defense of not only individuals at large, but in particular for members of the LGBT community, particularly those members who are the youngest, and very often challenged, even to this day in the year 2018, by violence, by disassociation, and sometimes by outright fear because of their inability to defend themselves as a direct result of the actions of our own state government. He's also president of the Rhode Island Log Cabin Republicans and has been active with us, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next segment. I just want to make a special note. This segment is brought to you by Air Sciences. Air Sciences, run by Daryl Gould, who, just coincidentally,
surprisingly,
what are the odds? Air Sciences has, well, for a couple of years now, been a sponsor of the coalition. Interestingly enough, its proprietor, Daryl Gould, happens to be, in full disclosure, running for the General Assembly, and who's he running against? Jason Knight. You're right. It's Rhode Island. What are the odds? But Daryl has been sponsoring the show for a number of years. Listen, Air Sciences is a wonderful Rhode Island company providing mold remediation, challenges in cleanups for biohazards. Air Sciences can make your home, your school, your place of business that much cleaner. Folks, if you're challenged by any autoimmune issues, if a member of your family is in poor health due to any neuromuscular diseases or cancers, let Daryl know there's special programs available so that particularly post-operative, he can actually provide a special level of cleaning under some special arrangements for folks who are impacted by that. But they service the entire Rhode Island, Connecticut, well into the North Shore, Massachusetts region. And again, providing the type of, I'll call it industrial level, without using chemicals that are challenging to the individual, but that sort of industrial level cleaning that the individual neither has access to the products of which to apply or the skills to do them. AirSciences.net has been a longtime supporter of the Coalition Talk Radio, and as I always like to say, folks who are willing to sponsor indie media and discuss provocative subjects, whether it be sexuality, whether it be human rights, whether it be the Fourth Amendment, whether it be the war on drugs, whether it be crony corporatism, these are businesses that deserve your support, because regardless of how you feel about an individual issue as it's being discussed here, if businesses are willing to go to bat to support the very existence of the conversation itself, well, they're extending themselves well beyond their responsibilities as local businesses. So airsciences.net, reach out to Daryl Gould and let him know how he can improve the quality and safety of not only your day-to-day life, but your home and your immediate environment. airsciences.net. Joining me again, Allan Giberti. He is active on a number of levels in the civic life of Rhode Island. He's president of the Log Cabin Republicans. He became somewhat famous for his provocative testimony, most recently in the run-up to the House's consideration and ultimate passage of a variety of Second Amendment, restrictive Second Amendment legislation, pointing out quite bluntly the challenges this legislation had to members of the LGBT community, particularly those members who are younger and those members who would all of a sudden be without the type of self-protection necessary to survive in what is a very difficult, challenging existence. Again, thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So, my run-up to my last question, what are your thoughts?
On how do we change it and make it better?
Yeah, what has to happen? Because let's throw one other thing in here. In the last few years, we've had, just forget about some of the more challenging role issues involved in talking about sexuality and talking about civil rights and human rights. It should all be easy, right? But it's not. And they're challenging for a variety of reasons to a lot of people. You know, we're talking about people who were steeped deeply, older generations, into a pattern of behavior and a pattern of thought that they're being, in a sense, challenged to change overnight. We can get into all of that. But we're talking about a state that in the last few years has faced endemic political corruption, has dealt with 38 studios, is told, just found out we're going to essentially subsidize to the tune of millions of dollars a baseball stadium, as well as every other tragedy or scandal du jour, and yet seems completely unwilling to change its course. Because despite the fact that they've got the ultimate tool, which is the power of the vote. So what do we do here?
I think what we need to do is we need to educate people and we need to vote these people out. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a huge change or whether it's a small change this time and a bigger change next time, we need to get these people out. Where fifth worst for business, instead of addressing the issues like infrastructure, let's just throw money at the problem. Let's build a stadium. Let's fix the problem. Let's fix the issue to resolve the problem. Let's just not make another problem. They make promises. They've always made promises. They've made promises to us. They never keep them, and for some reason we keep voting them back in. And I don't know what it's going to take before somebody realizes. For the Second Amendment issue and the LGBT, I mean, is it going to take another Pulse situation for somebody to go, okay, these people need to these people need the Second Amendment. They need to protect themselves. Is that what it's going to take?
Why does tragedy always have to be essentially the ignition for societal change?
Because I think that's when people pay attention, when they actually pay attention. When people die. When people die, when people are suffering, I think that's something like deep down inside of us humanly that makes us want to make it better. And I think if we can get past the initial, how do we make it better, let's take everyone's guns away, I think if we sat down and had a rational discussion, whether it be people pro-gun control, if we had a legitimate, honest discussion with facts, not rhetoric, not all emotional, I think we could get somewhere. But I don't think that's where we're going to be, especially with the current administration, because it's all emotion. It's all pandering. It's all basically it's all about her. I think we need to start fresh. I think that's how we fix the situation.
Yeah, and what's fascinating to me, I believe we're just about coming up on the 2nd anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando.
It was we're in July, last month.
Right.
Last month, yep.
So let's juxtapose two equally tragic events. Parkland and Orlando.
Yes.
Ironically, it's both occurred because of the results of Mad Men. Why has there been this overwhelming national response to Parkland? And there's no question that Parkland was a horrible, horrible tragedy. But why have we already forgotten about the Pulse nightclub?
Because something else took its place. I think we're inundated with news stories and constantly, and we're barraged with it nonstop for 2, 3, 4 a week, and then the next, and we focus on that, and then by the time a year comes around, it's already passed.
Right.
And I personally, I think a lot of those two situations could have been prevented if warning signs were, if people paid attention to warning signs beforehand. We're blaming the gun. We're not blaming people who could have said something. We're not blaming people who could have stepped up. We're blaming the gun. We're not blaming the person who committed the crime. We're not blaming the people who could have stopped the crime. And I think it's because it's what we're told to believe.
Within the LGBT community itself, I want to phrase this the right way. Is Orlando still resonate?
Yes.
Heavily?
Within the LGBT community, yes. I think it does. I'm not so sure about how the rest of the country feels about it when the anniversary comes around.
There was very little press mention this time around.
Yes. The LGBT caucus did put out a press release, though, about it.
Press releases.
Press release and...
Powerful stuff.
Yes, and actually, our Mrs. Cellini had even said, it had happened because we let a bad guy get a gun. So now we're going to punish all the good guys with guns, as opposed to making sure that the bad guys don't get the guns.
How does that work in reality?
You would need to ask him, because apparently he's a gun expert and an expert on the LGBT community. Neither of which I think anything he's done is productive or will actually result in anything good.
Has the governor ever, Governor Raimondo, of course we're talking about right now, who is up for re-election, she was quick to market pride. She was quick to market any ostensible connection she could make, however tenuous, with the community. Has she ever reached out and addressed defense issues with the LGBT community?
No, to my knowledge, she has not, because it's just she's more interested with the current rhetoric or the current belief that guns are bad and people with guns are bad, and she's pretty much just gone with that. I think if she honestly really cared or was really interested, she would actually have a conversation with people who are pro-Second Amendment, or people like me who are pro-Second Amendment because of the community that I come from. And it's kind of hard to do when you're not in the state, though. So.
You crazy kid, you. You mean she should actually go on a real listening tour?
She could at least stay in the state. You find her, track her down, but no.
Have any, and in all fairness, have any of the current candidates addressed this issue in your mind?
The only ones, actually, believe it or not, have been Republican legislators. I don't believe I've heard from one Democrat. Libertarians, no, Democrats, no. The Rhode Island Self-Defense Alliance had put out a list of the defenders of the Second Amendment and the enemies of the Second Amendment, and some of the rhetoric that came back was violent rhetoric from the NRA that we're pushing, calling it a war. It's not helping me. It's just them bouncing back their own rhetoric, and that's not saving anyone's lives. That's not making anybody better. It's not making anyone safer.
It's interesting too, in reflection, that Pat Morgan, who is a Republican candidate for governor and who has been on this show a couple of occasions over the years, she has worked aggressively towards making schools safer in sort of a parallel move. And the government regime headed by Ms. Raimondo has yet to, other than giving lip service to it, has yet to really address any concerns from the educational community. So it's, I guess you shouldn't feel left out or singled out, I should say. It appears this sort of, I mean, I'm going to ask you, I'll put you on the spot for a second. Is her entire concern with gun safety really just pure politics?
It is pure politics. I believe it is pure politics. It doesn't, I believe she does not care how it affects the everyday citizen. I think all she cares about is it's the new thing to ride on. People are behind it. People are demanding action, and she's riding that. Hopefully, she thinks she's going to ride that until the next election. And among other issues.
Yeah, it's a hell of a thing to fundraise off of too.
It is. It is.
I mean, right after Parkland, she was fundraising off of Parkland.
I think at this point, nothing would surprise me.
Well, in our conversations pre-show, I think I postured to you that my firm belief is that she's a thoroughly immoral human being.
And then going back to that same conversation, I believe I agreed with you wholeheartedly.
Let's give a plug for your event again. We still got plenty of time to talk.
Yes.
But I want to take this moment to give a shameless plug to your event.
All right, so it's going to be August 4th over at the Smithfield Sportsmen. It is at 11 o'clock. It is for the LGBT community and its allies. Coming down, you're going to learn about guns. You're going to get a chance to shoot a handgun, to shoot a rifle. If we're lucky and the weather is good, I believe we're going to be doing some trap shooting. There's going to be people there if you are interested in owning a handgun, helping you, how the paperwork to do that. If you want to pursue your concealed carry, there's going to be people there to help you with that. We're going to discuss, why it's important you should be armed. When you're sitting in your home in the night and someone breaks in, which we've had a couple right here, not that long ago, you have your choice. What's your weapon of choice? Is it your firearm or is it your cell phone? 911, how may I help you?
If in fact 911's working that night.
And you can find your cell phone at 2 in the morning because you're stumbling out of bed or whatever, and you grab it. What's going on? Pick up your phone, unlock it, call. Seconds. That's all it takes.
Right.
So I'm sorry. It's going to be at there. We're gonna have that. We're gonna have some speakers. Afterwards, we're gonna have a barbecue, some food. Chadwick Moore is actually, Chadwick Moore, Fox News contributor, he's going to be there as well. He's going to be speaking on the importance of the Second Amendment and the LGBT community.
Now, do folks have to own guns, or will there be guns available?
There will be guns available. The only thing you need to bring is your ID. There'll be guns available. There'll be ammo available. You don't need to purchase anything. This is basically it's an instructional event as to why it is important that we take our own defense seriously.
Right. And is there an age limit? Do you have to be over 18?
You have to be 18-year-old, yes.
Okay. So it's really, again, and what we touched on in the opening moments of the show, it's if for folks who haven't had an opportunity to familiarize themselves with weapons, it's an opportunity on two levels. Number one, there are many people who have spent their entire life never having been physically in the presence of a gun.
Yes.
Okay. And
it is intimidating.
yeah, but at the same time, I think it's important to sort of break through that, to really, I mean, I don't know that you can really understand the debate either way until you feel the power of a gun. And I mean that in twofold, because number one, if you should find yourself on the wrong end of one, that's not the time to bring you the type of focus you need to respond properly.
Right.
You need to understand what its real power is, what it can do. So that's just on a primary level. Number two, and I would imagine you're going to, I mean, if someone, particularly from the LGBTQ community, is opposed to the Second Amendment, is this not a powerful opportunity for them to have a conversation? And I mean a conversation. Because what's been remarkable about not only your comments before the General Assembly, but the entire tenor with which I've seen nationally the LGBT community discuss Second Amendment rights is the emotional maturity involved and the lack of overhyped rhetoric and the lack of fear-mongering and the lack of, actually it's quite stunningly, the lack of a lot of the identity politics that might be played in that. Your group and others like it have taken a rather sober, mature approach to discussing the issue, much more so than the people that oppose it. So would you suggest that someone who might be opposed to 2A but wants to actually have a conversation show up?
Yes, it's on it's on your show. Just come down. Just come down.
Hang out.
Just come down. If you
folks.
Right. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You might learn something. You might reinforce your own belief. That's not such a bad thing. But I mean, unless you challenge yourself, saying, you know what, I might be wrong. Maybe I should, or I might be right. Take a chance. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? You're either right or you're wrong.
Right.
The best thing that can happen is that you're prepared and you can defend yourself. I can't imagine just, if something like that were horrible were to happen, I can't imagine afterwards sitting back and going, did I do everything that I could to protect my family? I know right now I could honestly say, yes, I've done everything that I can protect my family, because it's not just the LGBT community as it was 20, 30 years ago. We have family, we have kids now. We not have to protect ourselves and our loved ones, but we have children now that we need to protect. They want to stop us. So I think if you have any questions or anything, or just curious, just come down.
You mentioned that during the event you're going to be talking to people who are looking to get permitted to carry. What's the reaction from law enforcement? This is a state that's notorious for its rather, I'll use the term, my term, not yours, I'll use the term schizophrenic approach to permitting, particularly at the town-by-town level. What has been the success, or have folks in the LGBTQ community faced challenges in getting permitted per se?
I'm going to have to say probably that's where we're pretty equal. I think we have just as much difficulty getting one as the straight community does. Yeah, I don't think there's any division there. I think they give us all a hard time.
Interesting. But has anyone, or have you ever met, I would be curious as to understand the kind of conversation that takes place when ostensibly you're, even though, and let's just say for the moment that, and point out that the Rhode Island Constitution is actually, if you will, far stricter on supporting the right to bear arms than the federal Constitution is.
Surprisingly, when we had our little ratification, we didn't touch it. our Article 20. We left our right to bear arms alone. We may have changed other, but we left that one alone.
Right. And how does the Constitution read?
It's basically, leave me alone. It shall not be infringed.
I mean, there's no qualifications to that, is there? There's no codification of any, well, except in this, or they shall not be infringed.
Correct.
That is the law by the founders of the state of Rhode Island.
Yes. We need to pass laws to make it illegal to not uphold the law.
So the conversation goes, and between law enforcement and the citizen, emphasis citizen, all right, who is a member of the community. If in fact these conversations have taken place, I feel challenged because folks in my community have been and continue to be, despite, again, the fact that it's year 2018, openly the object of violence based solely on our existence. I mean, that's at this point in time in America, the notion that there are people out there, and it's statistically fact, that there are people who are subject to extreme violence simply because of their existence, who are engaging in no behavior whatsoever that is at all detrimental, egregious, harmful, obstructive, or whatever to their fellow Rhode Islanders, fellow Americans, who by merely
Breathing.
right,
Yeah.
are the object of violence. Does that conversation have to come up with law enforcement in terms of getting permitted?
Personally, I mean, the officers that I've spoken to on a personal level think that we should, not just the LGBT community, but all of us should be able to defend ourselves. And the conversation that they can't be everywhere at once. By the time they get there, it's already too late. The law enforcement that I have spoke to are for Second Amendment people defending themselves, holding firearms. Officially, well, we've heard how that goes. Not a lot of them are on record saying that they support it. Actually, I think you've had more at the testimony, more testifying against it, I think. And I don't think anyone showed up to support it, actually. Did they? Any officers? I don't believe so. I could be wrong, but I don't remember.
Right.
I was there for 9 hours. So I don't remember seeing any.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet that was a remarkable showing of average, everyday Rhode Islanders that day.
It was all walks of life.
It was
Young, old.
a sea of yellow,
Yes.
literally blanketing an entire part, I would say a neighborhood or province. I don't know in the years that I've been politically active that I've seen that type of turnout.
Something, yes. Yes, yeah, I think you're right. I think the only other one may have been when we were initially trying to pass gay rights. When there was, I think, a large number of people.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic.
So, and yet these are, 99% of those people were not in the political bubble. They were just regular folks
Yes.
of literally every,
Walk of life.
yeah.
Yep.
You make great pains when we communicated for the first time back and forth by email that you're a regular working Rhode Islander. You're not a politician
Yes.
per se. You're not.
Blue collar. You know, I have calluses. Basically I do the job that most of the Democrats say that Americans won't do.
What's that?
I build things, I paint. My company that I work for, we take care of properties, I take care of the lawn, I'll fix the plumbing.
Right.
Pretty much I do the job that most of them say that, no, Americans won't do that. That's why we need to hire unskilled, illegal labor. Because they'll do it because Americans won't. Yeah, that's wrong. Imagine that, again.
Wow. It's compelling stuff. Will the community, from your perspective, organize in this election period to actively oppose politicians who are part of this perfidy, if you will? And will there be an attempt to actively work to roll back some of this legislation?
From the people that I've spoken to, yes. We're from the people I've spoken to, we're tired of being lied to. We're tired of being made out to be victims. We're tired of them trying to make us dependent on them. We're tired of them just lying to us.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason I think, before that, when they realized that we had the gay dollar, the gay money, we had influence. Well, and maybe, obviously they have voting power as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why we got where we got from the Democratic Party.
Because I have yet to see, Gordon Fox to the contrary. And Gordon Fox was less of a, he was a political machine operator who happened to be gay.
Mm-hmm.
Other than a tearful moment when marriage equality passed, there was very little to suggest that he was a leader in the LGBTQ community. Although yet he wore that on his sleeve in an effort to get election in a community like Fox Point that was clearly both sexually, ethnically, religiously, economically diverse. So he used that when it was convenient. But can you point to any, and I'm not sure, well, I am putting you on the spot, sorry.
All right.
But
Okay.
is there anyone, I guess I'll put it this way, this could be a failure on my part. I have yet to see members from the LGBT community step up in the manner which I've seen in places in New York and in Boston and in San Francisco, step up to aggressively counter these type of issues. You had political activity in the tragically multi-year run-up to marriage equality. But it seemed like the minute marriage equality was passed, then you had a significant drop-off in the politicization of the LGBT community. Is that accidental? Was that intentional? Or do you think it is a failure? I don't want to say leadership, but quite frankly, a failure.
On both sides.
Yeah.
On both sides, I think it is. I think we got equality, whether it's marriage equality or gay rights or anti-discrimination. I think, the playing field was leveled, and I think instead of staying on top of it and letting things like this happen, I think we fell asleep like most Americans did. Mm-hmm. Because again, they're not just trying to disarm us; they're trying to disarm everyday citizens, law-abiding citizens. I think we dropped the ball as much as the government dropped the ball. Mm-hmm. So I think the blame lies on both sides. I think we became complacent.
Interesting. Is there anyone emerging, besides yourself, to become a provocative voice? Because to me, the self-defense in the LGBT community is one of the most compelling issues facing your community right now.
Yes, I agree. So I'm going to say I don't believe so, and then I'm going to get an email when I go home. And then, what about, no one I can think of off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because you have states like California or Massachusetts. Most of the hate crimes occur in just a handful of states. California being one, Massachusetts being, I think, 6, California was number 1, New York, I think, is 8. Surprisingly, they have some really good, tough gun laws, too. I don't know if that's a coincidence.
Well, gun laws have traditionally worked really only to lower the barrier to access to guns to people who are law-abiding citizens.
Right. So I'm just wondering, is there a correlation between the number of hate crimes reported, in these higher states and their access to defend themselves? Right. Whether it's the access or even the education to know how to defend themselves.
How pervasive are LGBT, I'll call them hate crimes, here in Rhode Island? Does the city even promote statistics on that?
They do. But hate crimes, the problem with hate crimes is you need to prove basically the intent, that the person did this with hate in their heart. Sometimes it's easier to get someone for an offense such as, whether it be murder or whether it be assault. Even in the database where law enforcement puts that into the FBI hate crime database, you can download online the training manual. And I believe it is line 8A, where you define the type of hate crime that it is. It even says it in the training manual. Be very careful, because hate crimes are so hard to prove. Be careful before you label it as a hate crime. So right from the get-go, it's.
I mean, it's rare that someone walks up to someone, hurls some type of homophobic epithet, then reaches out and commits an act of violence. It's not usually that dramatic, is it, or is it?
It can be, usually during the slurs will come out. I think in the height of that kind of passion, the F word. I think that's when that comes out. But as victims tend not to report them, whether either be from fear of retaliation. Again, it's easier to prove an assault than it is to prove a hate crime. So to say that 12 hate crimes occurred last year in the state of Rhode Island, 12, most likely a lot more happened. It's just either it's underreported either by the victims or by the courts because they weren't charged with that, or by the police, or because not everyone is compelled to turn over that data, to submit that data to the FBI.
Providence, in particular, has got a very vibrant LGBTQ entertainment community. There are, I wouldn't say dozens, but there are a number of prominent establishments, some of them with a long history in the city, that clearly are epicenters, if you will, for a variety of reflections on the LGBT community. A good friend of mine in New York, once mentioned to me, and this might be more of a sentiment from the 80s and 90s, but particularly for younger members of the LGBT community, very often these clubs like Pulse, for example, are not just nightclubs, they're really community centers. They're where particularly young folks who may not have come out or not, folks, really, because they're young, coming to grips with their sexual identity in ways that are no different from the quote-unquote straight community, the LGBT community. And very often, depending on the part of the country, they may no longer have the type of family support system they had. That these clubs are really combination nightclubs, churches, community centers. They're more than just a casual bar. This ain't Cheers we're talking about.
Right.
These are very much the centers of the local community.
Right.
How good or how much are they allowed to defend themselves against potential attack? Very often during the summer, these clubs spill out into the streets like regular nightclubs. It's late at night. Alcohol and variety of intoxicants might be involved on all members of the side. Are these clubs arming themselves in a subtle manner, or are they using conventional bouncers? Or
I would say conventional bouncers.
Right.
When we decided to go ahead and put on this event, I reached out to several of the, more established centers of the LGBT community. Much like the questions I asked in my testimony, I'm still waiting for a response. I said I would like to promote this event. I said it's not political, even though I'm a Republican. It's not political. You can be Democrat, you can be independent, liberty. I don't care. What I care about is the LGBT community. A violent attacker isn't suddenly going to stop when he realizes that your political ideology is in line with his. Oh, you're a Democrat. It doesn't work that way.
Did you vote for Hillary?
Right. And that's hate crimes don't end at where your political affiliation begins.
Right.
And I tried to stress that as saying this, even though it's put on by the Log Cabin Republicans, the Rhode Island Second Amendment Coalition, Rhode Island Federalists, this isn't political. This is about your right and the importance for you to be able to defend yourself. And again, I've reached out to many of the LGBT hot centers and nothing. I've gotten more support from Republican and Libertarian organizations or businesses owned to help get the word out. The LGBT community, I've gotten.
That's, again, given the fact that particularly in the LGBT community, Pulse is such a recent, raw, open, bleeding wound in the literal as well as figurative sense, that's astonishing.
It's one of the worst attacks, the worst attack on the LGBT community. In my opinion, what our legislators are doing to leave the youngest and most vulnerable of our community defenseless, to me, that's the second attack. We have had 16, possibly 17 transgendered persons who've already been murdered, who have already died this year. Last year it was 27. We are set to break that, I believe, by September. It's more than 2 a month. Even GLAAD, which is kind of more, mainstream LGBT, are calling for the media to, this is an issue. The media has to portray that, has to report on this. It's an issue, nobody's paying attention to it.
Which is stunning given the fact that the media has been very willing to monetize the newfound acceptance of the LGBT community, particularly the trans community, in popular culture. So they're willing to profit from it.
Yes.
Everything from Orange is the New Black forward. That's seen as a kind of a dividing line, if you will, by people who follow popular culture at a very, very superficial level. So they're quite willing to profit from it.
Yes. Well, it doesn't fit their agenda. It doesn't fit the gun control agenda. If there's a legitimate reason why people should be able to own a firearm, this is an example of one of those things, and they ignore it because it doesn't fit what they're peddling.
Talk about, if you will, the vulnerabilities, particularly of the trans community, because you're right. The trans community in this nation, as it's again, so much of this conversation from my perspective becomes cliched because it's tough to put your arms around some of these issues. Clearly, I believe, personally, the mainstream acceptance and the emergence of the trans community in this country is a quote-unquote double-edged sword. For every positive step forward folks have had in having conversations about gender dysphoria or any one of the issues that surround it, there has been, statistically, you're absolutely right, absolute statistics, that the level of harm being directed at members of the trans community has become more provocative.
Yes.
What challenges do they face both in the workplace and just being able to even report, comfort level in reporting these type of crimes? Are you familiar with that?
I am not. I'm gay. I have friends who are transgender. To me, not that I don't understand. I can relate to it more, I think, more than a, say, straight person, because it's considered like a gay minority. We're different because of, our sexuality. I can't imagine what it would be like to identify as the opposite sex and be trapped in a male body. I have friends tell me about the struggles and the things that go on in their life. I can relate to it only so far as like being a gay man, but to the level of whether it's discrimination, looks, comments, that I can relate. But I think it's much more difficult for them because it's. I think a majority of the people are either, I don't want to say majority of the people, but they're either. I think most people are either very accepting or not, and I think that's in the straight or the gay community as well.
Right. Simultaneous to all of this are two divergent issues that clearly exacerbate the situation. First of all, the Me Too movement and their acceptance of the trans community. And number two, I'm not sure how closely you followed the emergence of FOSTA and SESTA, legislation that really criminalizes communication between folks who work in areas of business related to sexuality, and what kind of impact that's had on the trans community, because sadly there is a measurable percentage of the trans community that appears to be forced to survive based on things like survival sex and issues like challenges like that, and which makes them, you've now got the situation where, essentially any of the communication that takes place in the gay or straight sex community is now been forced back undercovers, back into the dark alleys, which has only made life less safer for those individuals, while simultaneously you've got an attack on a fundamental right to defend oneself. You've literally taken a significant part of the trans community and created targets out of them.
Yes. Right now, and black trans women, I think, are targeted the most. I mean, I couldn't imagine if 18, I mean, when I came out, it wasn't that, basically I never saw my father again. I was older, I was established, I wasn't homeless. I couldn't imagine being 18, coming out, being tossed out, not knowing what to do, and then also being a target. Yeah, and not being able to protect my home. I can't wrap my head around that. How that can happen and how the people we elected to take care of us can allow that to happen. So I think it's time for a big change.
So the question we almost have to leave unanswered for now is, what can we as a political community do to essentially drag our elected leaders, rhetorically kicking and screaming?
I mean, out of all of this, since my testimony, I think we need to come together. I mean, I report back to National for the Log Cabin Republicans, and we're supposed to be doing networking, and I have other members from other chapters, and they ask, I'm with the Second Amendment Coalition, and I'm working with the Rhode Island Self-Defense, and they're like, are these LGBT groups? And I'm like, no, they're not. They're predominantly these are straight. They don't care, but a majority of the members are straight. The issue is about protection, and I think the way to overcome or to defeat these politicians who basically are just out for themselves is for us to just come together and realize what's important and what's trivial. Because in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference if I can marry my partner if I can't, defend my family. Being able to marry, my partner isn't going to amount to much if I'm dead.
Right.
So I think we need to prioritize things, I guess.
You talked about the working with the Second Amendment Coalition and pointing out some of the folks that you've got some villains, and we've talked about one tonight. I'm not here interested in bashing people per se. We'll have that opportunity offline because I think we shared that list when it came out. But who are some of the heroes?
Sure, Roberts. She's the first one I say, and I said I know it's going to be a test on this one.
And what has she done? Because I know a little bit about her, but we can bring people up to speed.
I think basically what the best way for you to determine, and for my own heroes or people who, I would go to the Rhode Island State House. I would pull up their voting records, and I think that speaks for who we should be supporting and who we should be voting out of office. It's all public record. I would look up or you can go to VoteSmart, any of the other ones, and you can see what key issues they voted on. And that's what I would suggest people to do.
But Sherry in particular has been
supportive. I think she's been very supportive, and not just to me, but I mean, it's like just the 2A community in general. Yeah, she was actually the first one that as far as like the Log Cabin Republicans president, that I put up for an endorsement.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, we've had Sherry on the show again. I think we'll make sure that we get her on the show before election time, so she can sort of round out the perspective. So you have some legislators who are supportive. I guess you're just kind of starting to wrap this up. You've got an opportunity in the next legislative session to promote legislation to sort of try and roll this back.
Yes.
And I think, I'll use the getting back on the bicycle after you've fallen off initiative. I think even though clearly it will be a difficult road to hoe, I think it's clearly important that in attempting to roll back the legislation is in fact a political statement unto itself, because it forces the issue to remain visible, that no, these legislative changes weren't acceptable. We will not just sit by because one group of people at one point in time decided that this was okay to do.
Right.
If you had, of all the laws that passed, if you had the one wish, which of the laws in this last session do you find the most egregious? And which would, if you had to,
that's tough. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, lowering the age to purchase a firearm. Increasing the age to purchase a firearm to 21. For me, I think that is probably close to being the worst. The emergency protection order, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad too.
I mean, the ACLU came down and just put
Yes.
we had Stephen Brown from the ACLU on here on the show.
I've even reached out to the ACLU. I haven't heard back from them either, surprisingly.
That's something we should tackle.
Oh, I would
together.
I would have no problem sitting down with the ACLU, but no, I haven't heard anything back from them.
So if you could wave the magic wand, clearly the 18 to 21, that really hits home.
Yes, I think that leaves, not just in the LGBT, but that just leaves so many people defenseless, or the opportunity, if they choose to purchase a firearm for their own self-protection, it doesn't even give them that chance.
Right.
I mean, unless they want to be a criminal because they want to stay alive and illegally purchase one. But yeah, I would probably have to say for me that would be the worst one.
Right. And yet somehow these laws are permitted to stand despite the fact that the Rhode Island Constitution says the right to carry shall not be abridged.
Yes. I don't know why we just, I mean, if you don't like the laws, change the laws. Just don't make new ones and ignore the old ones.
Right. Just, well, it's as you pointed out, it's just a complete failure in leadership.
Yes.
Whew, wow. As we like to say here on the coalition, yikes. So if I can make a summary, Your Honor, we've got a number of laws that were passed that do nothing to really protect the innocent, that were clearly passed above and beyond the limitations of the Rhode Island Constitution. We've got an entire generation of lawmakers patronizing communities while at the same time, on a simple moral level, failing them. And we have to find some way to wake up a variety of constituencies who for too long have accepted the status quo in order to do it. It's a pretty tall order.
I would be happy to sit down with any of them and discuss it. I mean, even if I got a stupid answer like, well, because that's what we think is best with nothing, just an answer. Right?
And for the record, and I just repeat, and the video is up there on the coalition, we'll continue to share it, and we'll continue to share, and one more shameless plug for your event. Despite the fact now that it's been several months, you have, for the record, yet to receive a response from Jason Knight as to how to defend the most defenseless folks in your community, which is folks who are 18 to 21 years old, of good character, who simply, because they've got a significantly higher than average potential to be the victim of a crime simply based on their existence, how do they defend themselves?
That would be the question.
Well, again, one of these crazy Rhode Island coincidences. I happen to be involved in Darrell Gould's campaign. What are the odds? So I personally am going to ask a lot of people that question in Barrington and Warren. And given the fact that we have yet to receive an answer, and when I say we, the entire, this may be reflective of an individual community within Rhode Island, but as is any question of fundamental human rights, it's important to all communities, and the community that really matters, which is the entire body of folks in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Because as goes, sometimes the folks who are most challenged by these laws, we all go. And regardless of whether it's a power plant up in Burrowville, or an LNG facility in Providence, or the rights of someone to bear arms, we are ultimately all Rhode Islanders.
Yes.
And we have to look out for each other during these incredibly straightforward moral questions. And this is one of those times.
And I would also I'd be happy to go to that particular district and ask them as well how they would suggest that minority groups protect themselves.
Well,
I would be happy to go down there.
We should do that together.
We should.
Yeah, kind of like a political play date.
I would do that. I would so do that.
That's awesome. Consider it a date.
Okay.
All right. One more time, because I want to make sure and again, here's my takeaway, and then you promote the event. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity for folks of goodwill, regardless of sexual identity, regardless of personal politics, regardless of position in the community, regardless of thoughts about 2A, to get together in an environment where education and discussion will be the principal focus, and coupled with an opportunity for people over 18 to come face to face and perhaps confront their demons or confront the needs for education with firearms, and to do so at effectively little or no cost.
Right.
Sounds like a pretty damn good value proposition to me.
I think it's going to be a good time. I think it's going to be a good time.
So give us the whole rundown one more time. Also, how people can find you in a variety of aspects of your civil life, and just give us the big wrap up here.
So the event again, it is on August 4th at 11 o'clock at the Smithfield Sportsmen. 11 o'clock till 4. You can learn about firearms, fire safety. It is free, doesn't cost anything. If 18, bring an ID. We're going to have food. We're going to have speakers. And the worst thing that might happen is you might learn something.
Sounds good to me. Facebook page?
Facebook page, you can go to Log Cabin Republicans of Rhode Island, and also Log Cabin Republicans of Rhode Island on Twitter.
Excellent. And this is also being supported by the Second Amendment Coalition as well.
Second Amendment Coalition, Federated Sportsmen, there's Rhode Island Self-Defense Alliance, Rhode Island Rifle and Revolver. It's all on
There's an alphabet soup.
There's so many groups that I never actually anticipated would actually be involved in this.
That's excellent.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Allan Giberti, of course, of the Rhode Island Log Cabin Republicans, and of, again, the alphabet soup, if you will, of Second Amendment coalition groups. But most importantly, and here's the takeaway, most importantly, focus on a fundamental civil right. It's a right to defend oneself. This is a right that is natural and is natural born to the individual, man or woman. This is a right that is colorblind, religiously blind, sexuality blind. This means that you get to do it, and that this is your right, and you do not have you should not be forced to give permission to a government to take that away from you. This isn't a privilege. This ain't a driver's license. And the beauty of this event and some of this conversation is that we, as an organization of organizations, is going to refocus public scrutiny in just that manner. It's not a result of tragedy. It's not a result of politics. We're talking about people's lives here, and we're talking about the right to people to conduct their lives in the manner they see fit, as long as no harm accrues to any individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break right now. Again, I must give homage, if you will, to tonight's sponsor for this segment. Of course, coincidentally, Darrell Gould. airsciences.net, mold remediation, biohazards remediation, making your home, your workplace, your school, literally your entire life cleaner, safer, healthier. airsciences.net, Darrell's got a variety of programs aimed at everything from preschools to manufacturing to homes. It was a challenging spring if you are a homeowner here in Rhode Island. I fear that for a lot of people, they're waking up to the reality of the molds and the different impacts of their home, even being mildly flooded. Folks, take care of it. And again, I want to point out, should you be, unfortunately, the victim or suffering from some type of autoimmune disease, cancer, neuromuscular issues, for which a freshly cleaned home, and we're not just talking spick and span here, there are a variety of professional treatments that Daryl can use and his hardy team that can really change your ability to enjoy your own home as you recover from illness. Please reach out to them, airscience.net. We're going to take a quick break right now. Folks, this is the Coalition. We are loud and proud. As always, we are outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love. It's a steamy, muggy night, which means the beer downtown has never been colder, the air conditioning has never been better, and it's a wonderful night to come out and enjoy the very best that the capital city has to offer. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. We continue to monitor the situation with your Pawtucket Red Sox at Pawtucket is Home, the all apolitical anti-billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed. And of course the mothership, our homepage, Coalition Radio US, where these and all other shows at some point, when your host gets around to it, are recorded in perpetuity for your continued listening and video enjoyment. Folks, we're going to take a couple minutes. We'll have our Yacht Club discussion. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.